So taking a look at Africa and specifically Niger right here, it looks like Russian and American military personnel are going to be sharing an airbase in Niamey, which I'll zoom in here. And you'll see here it's just outside of the city. It's an airport, but also used by military personnel from the United States to conduct counterterrorism operations in the region. And it seems now Russian troops are moving to occupy the quarters here. Now, before anyone freaks out, this is not an attack on American forces by the Russians. This is not some sort of takeover by force. This is an orderly transition of military facilities from the Americans to the Russians. But the presence of Russian troops in Niger, where military personnel from the US are stationed, has stirred concerns from all sides due to the close proximity it creates between US and Russian forces. Now, this development is significant due to the ongoing efforts to combat ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates in the Sahel region, where violence has been escalating. Niger holds strategic importance for the United States, serving as a crucial operational hub in West Africa, for which Niger receives substantial military and humanitarian assistance, which is being turned off. The situation in Niger took a drastic turn for the worst last July, when the military coup ousted the government and took President Mohamed Bazoum hostage. Following the coup, the new leadership expelled European forces and sought support from Russia, and this is due to European protests over the coup. And this is very similar to what happened in Mali and Burkina Faso after their coups. After a visit by a U.S. delegation, the junta in Niger revoked a military agreement allowing U.S. military personnel in the country, and the junta also announced that flights from the U.S.-built airbase are now illegal, and they will no longer recognize American military presence in the country. Additionally, they criticized the U.S. for advising against cooperating with Russia and Iran, asserting their sovereignty in choosing military partners. But the U.S. is actually right here, as I will talk about in a moment. Russia has a history of wrecking African countries. Now, U.S. troops have recently left neighboring Chad, while French forces were expelled from Mali and Burkina Faso in April. As a result, the U.S. has cut off $500 million in assistance to Niger, and the European Union cut off $550 million. The French cut off $120 million. Combined, the loss to Niger is equivalent to losing 8% of their GDP. And don't expect Russia to pick up the slack. The combined amount the US, EU, and France gave to just Niger is the same amount Russia gives in total aid worldwide. For reference, Russia gives about $1.1 billion per year in total aid. The US gives $56 billion. Nonetheless, Russian military trainers have arrived in Niger, and they've reportedly entered the airbase as of yesterday. The situation places U.S. and Russian troops in close proximity amid escalating military and diplomatic tensions focused on Ukraine. Now, despite U.S. and Russian troops occupying the same base, it's important to note that Russian forces are expected to use a separate hangar, and that minimizes their direct interactions. Even U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has played down the potential risk to American troops and the possibility that Russians have access to military hardware. And this is because the U.S. is actually in the midst of a drawdown from that airbase anyways. Now, the Russians have been actively fostering relations with African nations, presenting themselves as an alternative partner to the U.S. Mali has become one of Russia's closest allies in Africa, with Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary force, deployed to combat the government's enemies in the region. They're basically being used as mercenaries to kill off any opposition. Now, it's worth noting the Soviet Union did the same thing, right up until it collapsed. They made alliances with Mozambique, Ethiopia, Somalia, Congo, and Guinea. Russia tried to use trade and military assistance to build ties with those countries. However, under decades of Russian influence, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, and Guinea were in the bottom 10 for poorest countries in Africa, with Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Somalia occupying the poorest 3 spots. Meanwhile, under U.S. aid programs, Niger saw its per capita GDP triple in the last 24 years. So why give the U.S. the cold shoulder in favor of Russia if that's the case? Well, in reality, these moves are made because these African leaders in places like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, who took power via coup, are seeking legitimacy and security from one of the most infamous and despotic leaders on earth. And he's happy to oblige. The people of Russia and the people of Niger be damned. Much of the rest of the world, including all of the remaining members of ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, have denounced these coup leaders. So they have nowhere else to turn to gain any kind of legitimacy and secure their power from a foreign entity other than Russia and potentially other countries that are in that same vein. And that's why I brought up Iran, potentially even North Korea in this situation.